Hello and welcome along to the On the Whistle podcast. I'm your host, Zayn Nabbi. Joining me today from Hotlanta is none other than our cross-platform reporter and also host, Alasdair Howorth. He's the man still in the United States enjoying the FIFA Club World Cup, at least enjoying it as much as he can with no African participation. Ali, how are you doing, brother?
Zayn, I'm all right. As you said, I'm in Atlanta. I thought this, I've been very clever. I was like, okay, if coming into the Club World Cup, I think if Al Ahly get through, they'll come to Atlanta to play. If Sundowns get through, they'll be in Charlotte, which is, just a few hours drive from Atlanta. Let me try to plan to base
Mhm.
myself out of here. This is going to be perfect. Then, again, if Al Ahly somehow win that game, they'll be in Atlanta again for the quarterfinals. Okay, this is great. This is great. Unfortunately, they didn't make it. So instead, I had to watch a very woeful Inter Miami side get smashed by PSG. And look, this PSG side is amazing, but
Mhm.
it just made me come away feeling so angry because I'm like, this Al Ahly team would have given them such a better fight, would have given them such a better game. But here
Absolutely.
we
And
are.
for those listening out there, this is going to be our pod today. We are doing our debrief on the FIFA Club World Cup, honed in on the four African participants: Al Ali, Sundowns, Esperance, and Wydad. We're going to run you through each of the teams and our takeaways. And Ali, given you were in Atlanta watching PSG, and this could have been the game, Al Ali um, actually put up more of a fight than Inter Miami. I mean, does the Al Ali campaign end in the Hard Rock Cafe when two players disputed a penalty?
Yeah, Zayn, I mean, we often say football's a game that's or based around moments. And I think no other team at this tournament is experienced that like Al Ahly. Because that first game they smashed Inter Miami in the first half. They created so many chances, disallowed goals, two one-on-ones, and it just felt like at this tournament, absolutely everything that could just went against Al Ahly, particularly in that first game. Their superstar Imam Ashur, who was amazing in the first game, or like every time he picked up the ball, created two one-on-one chances for Wessam Abu Ali. He almost scored a one-on-one himself whilst he was carrying a broken I think collarbone, and he gets injured within the first 20 minutes. And then they for all their good work they get a penalty, and then obviously Mahmoud Trezeguet tries to make it about him. He argues with Wessam Abu Ali, who's meant to be the penalty taker, and Trezeguet takes the ball off him, takes the penalty, misses, and it just felt like that time again. And another example in that first game, which obviously the penalty was the flashpoint, but I think a lot of people didn't necessarily pick up on it. But Inter Miami were extraordinarily lucky to have 11 players on the pitch because their center
Mhm.
back Aviles, uh, twice trip players running through, not quite on goal, but very clear yellow cards. The second one not given, even though if he wasn't on a booking, it would have been given. And so there's just such a strong sense of frustration from that first game. But, and I say but, Zayn, they didn't recover from that, and that's ultimately why they headed out of this tournament. Is we can say it was all about that moment, and in many ways it was, but against Palmeiras they were comprehensively outplayed. Palmeiras held them at arm's length. Yes, they were really unfortunate again with Wessam Abu Ali scoring that own goal. Kind of not really anything you can do about that, but they didn't. They were never in that game really. And then in the last game against Porto, again, they're the better team. They create more chances. They should have been like 7-3 at when Porto scored the equalizer
That
at the
Porto
end.
game was nuts. 8 goals, and
Crazy.
you know what I mean. It's just like
Yeah.
if you can stack four against a pretty regular in the Champions League in terms of those Portuguese giants. I mean, you got to put Inter Miami away. There's just no excuse. You
100%.
know what I mean?
100%. And that's the frustrating thing is over the years, and I think that's the bigger surprise is over the years, Al Ahly have shown us that they compete with the very best. They've shown us over the last few years in the Club World Cup, they've consistently come third or fourth at the previous Club World Cups, and they've come third quite a few times. And in that time, they've beaten teams like the Seattle Sounders, they've beaten Al Ain. They've shown that aside from the Brazilians and the Europeans, Al Ahly are the best of the rest, really. I mean, I
Mm.
now Al Hilal will contest that, but they then didn't show that against Inter Miami, and it was just a tremendous disappointment in terms of their tournament. Now, like we want to couch this in some realism, because I think for all the expectations were there. I wrote an article looking at the predictions ahead of the tournament and looking at the results. Now, if you looked at, I used Opta's kind of supercomputer that they use that
Mm.
runs prediction models and does up to 10,000 trials of it. Al Ahly were expected to come bottom of the group. It was the closest group in terms of the time, but they were expected to come bottom of the group. So there needs to be some realism in terms of these
Hmm.
other three teams all have budgets, players, that are way and above what Al Ahly can afford. But having said that, there is a huge sense of missed opportunity, a huge sense of Al Ahly did not deserve to come fourth. They were the second best team in this group, and somehow they came fourth.
Yeah, and I got to ask you, what does this all now mean for the new coach, Jose Riviero? He's obviously come in very successful at Orlando Pirates, not necessarily in the league, because we know that Sundowns are just leagues ahead of everyone in the domestic league in South Africa. But Al Ali fans, the Al Ali board, the expectation around that team is to always do well, always to exceed what anybody else would expect from an African team. Do you get the sense that he's going to get more time in the role to sort of put his stamp on this team and at least have a chance at winning something with the Egyptian Giants?
Yeah, I feel like the he's in a bit of a weird place, and Al Ahly are in a bit of a weird place, right? Because like you said, this is a club beyond any bar, maybe Real Madrid, that just expect success in every facet. And now suddenly they're in a tournament where they're at the bottom of the barrel in terms of expectations and priorities. And one thing I will say that Marcel Koller did very well, I know it didn't end very well with him at Al Ahly, but he always did very well at the Club World Cup. He was competitive and he brought them to that next level. Now, Ribeiro, obviously, it's not a great look for him. In many ways, it's been a bit of a catastrophe. But not just the way, not just the fact that Al Ahly came bottom of their group, but the way they did. Like we said, it was, you know, disastrous in that sense. And so in that sense, I think the pressure is already on. We spoke about this ahead of the Club World Cup, that this was such a risky move from him, because if the Club World Cup doesn't go well, he's suddenly on a ticking time bomb, and he is now. I think is the sad reality. And look, it's not going to get easy for him in terms of Pyramids have now emerged as a fully fledged African elite side. So suddenly they're not. Al Ahly, suddenly the league title is not theirs to win. It's suddenly, and Zamalek have come back. They won the Egyptian Cup. So suddenly there's competition domestically. Now, having said that, Ribeiro, we know what he can do. As you said, we've seen him from a South African perspective. Five cups he won, and you say league they didn't do like as well. I would argue him coming second 3 seasons in a row was an amazing achievement. I don't think Pirates have ever in their history come in the top 2 places 3 seasons in a row. Yes, you can't catch Sundowns, but that's almost impossible in terms of their budget. But he now comes into the season with an incredibly strong squad. Some of the signings they've made that will stick around for this season are a top class. You think of Mohamed Ali Ben Ramdan. We're not entirely sure. I think Fati won't stay, but if Jiang does, they've suddenly got this team. They got Zizo, Trezeguet, who are both sticking around for the next season. They have an excellent, excellent team. So Rivero is under a lot of pressure, and they
Hmm.
will expect victories and wins from the off, because of that, because of the squad they've got, because of the investment, and because the Club World Cup didn't quite go so well.
Well, we wait to see what will happen there. But it looks like Riviero, for all intents and purposes, will be a part, at least of the preseason. I know there was some news about his meeting with Mahmoud Al Khatib, Bibo, the legend of Egyptian football, the legend of Al Ali, and the president of the club. And it looks like the discussions that were held recently were really about squad development and players. So for now, it looks like he will retain his position. Looking at another coach who there might be question marks is Miguel Cardoza, the mentor at Sundowns. I got to say, I am still feeling incredibly deflated after Sundowns Club World Cup. I mean, the final 10 minutes and added on time, when, as Courtney says, they should have been causing chaos. It
Hmm.
was like a balloon slowly letting out air. I
Yeah.
just couldn't believe what I was watching. I mean, people can criticize me for some of the things I say, but I'm generally really positive about Sundowns and the way they play and the African way. but it just killed me. And I'm still, as I said, I'm still like, I feel like I'm a bit of a blur on how they sort of, I don't want to quite say they lay down on their backs and died, but they just didn't show the hunger and the fight and the will to actually like get over the line and win.
I think for me, Zane, I totally agree in terms of the frustration. You know, I wasn't at that game in person, but watching it was just, oh my goodness, yeah, there's just like so much at a time, and there was just no pressure. I think for me, I would say, I think I would come away, you know, obviously as not being the Mzansi in the room, I come away maybe not quite so frustrated with Sundowns because I think there's ultimately it's a sense of, for me, inexperience. Like this is what Fluminense do. This is what Brazilian teams are good at. They're so good at managing the tempo of games. They're so good at slowing games down when they need to. And Fluminense probably more than any of the other three Brazilians is, you know, they showed that against Borussia Dortmund that they can speed up the game when they want to, but they can also slow it down when they want to. And so for me, it's less of a that Sundowns didn't show the fight, didn't show the kind of, you know, passion. It was more just tactically they weren't ready for it. They couldn't deal with Fluminense shutting down the game, and we saw that throughout the game, right? Obviously, they created that one excellent chance for Tashreeq Matthews in the early on, but aside from that, Fluminense kind of held Sundowns at arm's length. You know, Fluminense essentially came into the game saying, "Look, we're not going to try and score that. You know, really, if we can score on the break, maybe you know we'll take that, but we'll take the 0-0 draw." And they kind of laid down the
Mhm.
gauntlet for Sundowns. And I guess for me, that's the frustration because we've seen this in the CAF Champions League this season in particular, where Sundowns have been presented with these defensive low blocks and they've really struggled. Now, in the Champions League, they got away with it, I think, to an extent against Esperance. They weren't excellent, particularly in that second leg. And, you know, if Jabri wasn't offsides, he would have scored the equalizer. Against Ahly, they were very fortunate to get that deflected, that own goal right at the end. So there is a sense, I think, from a tactical perspective of okay, we can break down these low blocks in the PSL,
Mhm.
no problem. But when we come again up against the North African teams, when we come up against the Brazilian teams, we don't quite have the magic to create those chances, to create those. And I think for Sundowns, yeah, it's there is a sense of I don't think there's as much frustration for me as there is with Al Ahly because I do think Sundowns actually gave a very good account of themselves. They got the win against Ulsan, but there was a similar sense of oh, what could have been because for me it's
Oh yeah,
more about that Dortmund game that
exactly.
really let me down. Like they should
Well,
have
well,
won
well,
that game. They should have drawn that game at the very least.
sure, 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 sure. And look, I mean, we love to hear from our community out there, Ali. And I'm going to bring in some comments. I mean, Courtney and I did the debrief after Sundowns got eliminated. It was immediate reaction, and we got some really lovely comments that I want to read and get your reaction to. And for those of you listening out there, please hit us up at OTW_podcast on X and Instagram. Ask us questions, give us comments, like, subscribe, share content. And you can do the same by searching for the On the Whistle podcast on Facebook and YouTube. Find where we are and talk to us. We had Mtokozisi Mshlangu say, Sundowns playing the ball actually helped the defense against Fluminense. What the guys are suggesting, and the guys, if I'm correct, as the analysts, is exactly what has to do with the three clubs that we're doing all the time. It doesn't necessarily work every time. The opposition team has little or no chance to hurt when they do not have the ball. The key to this type of football played by Sundowns is the opposition should be tempted to look for the ball for it to be effective. Mtokozisi, thank you for that comment. We also had Mr. Monk 9517 say the coach needs one more season and a refreshed squad. We'll judge him then, let him stay. What killed Sundowns? One, the lack of a left footed centre back meant that the midfielders had to come deep to collect the ball. The team failed to play a high line. Lebusa should have played ahead of Kekana. Two, lack of player rotation by the coach, huge squad. Three, Oba should have been given minutes ahead of Adams to drive the team up the field. Mr. Monk, 9517, thank you very much for those comments. That analysis really, really is valued by us. Ali, you've probably heard those for the first time. What are your immediate reactions? What stands out to you from those Sundowns fans?
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess the first comment, he's spot on in terms of obviously keeping possession isn't just about attacking, right? Yeah, it's about your rest defense, stopping team. The problem is Sundowns didn't do that well. right? Because in the Dortmund game, they got caught in transition multiple times. So for me, there's a sense of, oh, absolutely, I agree with you. I don't think, I'm not someone who thinks that, the way Sundowns plays football is the issue, because I actually think the way they play is brilliant, is beautiful, it's effective, and it can work. The problem is they were shown that it couldn't work against Dortmund, and it couldn't work against Fluminense for two different reasons. Against Dortmund is because they couldn't stop the transitions, and against Fluminense it didn't work because they couldn't break down a low block. And look, Zayn, I think for Sundowns is different from Al-Ahly because this was Sundowns' first experience of playing in the Club World Cup since 2016 when Pizza Mosemane took them to Japan, and they got beaten by Kashima Antlers and got smashed by Jumbuk Motors. I think it was like 4-1, 4-0. Like this is an
Mhm.
entirely different team. There's only a couple guys who are still in that team, like Mshishi and Dennis Onyango, who are part of that CAF Champions League winning side in 2016. So this team has no experience of playing against the very best, against the Club World Cup team. So
Mhm.
for me, that's where I'm a bit more with Sundowns. Like, look, this was your first ever competitive game against a European team, and you pushed them so close, and you did it in the Bafana style, in the Brazilian way. They represented the Shushan and Piano philosophy of Sundowns. So I think in that sense you can be really proud of what Sundowns have done. For me, there is a bit of a frustration with them because that Fluminense game they didn't get it over the line. The Dortmund game they showed naivety, but I think for me that's neither here nor there. For me, in terms of the second point about actual players involved, I was really surprised Ashley Cupido played. But he was actually excellent, and I think there's a sense of maybe Labusa could have come in for Grant Kakana. For me, actually, for me, honestly, and I'm sure Sundowns won't appreciate me saying this, the player that for me was the issue going forward was Mshishi. It was Tembazwane. And look, it's not to hold out anything against him. He's a legend. He's a phenomenal player. These were his first minutes, his first starts in months, since his injury, with Bafana back in, what was it, December, November. So for me, that was what surprised me. I would have preferred to see in these games Jaden Adams start ahead of him. I think Adams showed it, particularly in that Fluminense game when he came on from
Mhm.
Mokoena, that he has that ball progression. And then you bring on Sales, or maybe you start Sales as the 10. For me, Sales, I'm still not sold on. But for me, that's where they could have offered more, because they really struggled for that kind of line breaking passes and that kind of action that I think Jaden Adams really brings, and I really
Mhm.
rate Jaden Adams highly. But again, for Sundowns, it's frustrating, and we expected more.
I
But
mean,
when we
touch
actually reflect on
on that
it,
opportunity. I
yeah,
mean, right?
exactly,
He needs to put it away.
he does.
Quality
And
players
and
put
look,
it away.
yeah, and look, he's a young guy. He's had those
Mhm.
chances. He had that chance in the CAF Champions League final that he missed. He'll learn from this. I think Sundowns
Mhm.
will. And I agree. I don't think they should sack Cardozo. I know he's not been an amazing, he's not been brilliant, but he's been close. He's been very close. He was so close in the CAF Champions League. He was so close in the Club World Cup. So for me, and this is what another thing, and maybe we'll get onto it, I find really interesting about the Club World Cup is how you approach squad building now, because now Sundowns have to make sure they get back to the Club World Cup,
Of course.
so they have to win a CAF Champions League or regularly reach the finals, and they have to be squad building towards the Club World Cup, because for me that's ultimately the big issue of all the African clubs. None of them built towards the Club World Cup. So yes, for me, you give Cardozo another season. If he doesn't show progression, and progression doesn't necessarily mean trophies, but if he doesn't show progression, then I think you part ways. I think for me that's how I would see it.
Cool. Ali, good moment for us to transition to other teams, well, other African teams in the FIFA Club World Cup. But for those of you listening out there, if you agree or disagree with Ali, please let us know. Again, OTW_podcast on our social media handles. Already one of our community from a previous podcast said something along the lines of, "It's so weird the Kenyan guy knows more than the South African guy about Sundowns." If you agree with that, post it. If you don't, I like you. But Ali, let's cast the mind to Esperance. They had one win at the tournament. They beat LAFC, but failed to progress from their group. I mean, overall, what did you make of their campaign?
Say we've gone from the teams we had expectations for to now the teams we had no expectations for. Look, for me, Esperance had the best Club World Cup of any of the African sides. Um, and
Wow,
and it's
really?
I yeah, and I don't say that because
You got to
they.
back that up because I mean,
Yeah, so I let me couch that for you. So I'm not saying that because they played the best football, they got the best results.
mm,
I'm saying given their expectations before the tournament, where they were coming from, the group they were in, how they ended up doing. Because for me, and this isn't to let Esperance off the hook because expectations were low because they've been really mismanaged the last couple of years. And even this last season they had four coaches, before Maher Kanzari finally got the job. But even him, he was brought in a CAF Champions League. His first game was against Sundowns in the CAF Champions League quarterfinal. It's terrible squad building, terrible preparations. From Esperance. So I don't want to let them off the hook. But coming into this tournament, we had high expectations of Al Ahly. We had high expectations of Sundowns. We had no expectations of Wydad, and we had some expectations of Esperance. So for me, Esperance, yes, they were comfortably beaten by Flamengo. Chelsea comfortably beat them 3-0.
mm,
So for
mm,
me, but for me, those were both expected. We knew that would happen. So for me, the real question for Esperance's Club World Cup and their legacy at this tournament was that LAFC game. Now it's easy for us as people who watch African football week in week out and people who get frustrated with the way that African clubs are represented to say, of
mm,
course Esperance can be LAFC. Of course they can. This is a team with over 100 years of history that have won CAF Champions League. They're used to competing. As LAFC have almost no history. They've got one MLS Cup and they've done all right in the CONCACAF Champions League. But Zane, in terms of the comparisons of these two teams, I just want to hit you with some numbers really quick. Okay, and this is coming from Maher Mazahi, our good friend. So, I'm
African
trusting in
Five
his
Side
analysis.
podcast. Like,
Exactly,
subscribe, search for it. My hair does great work.
absolutely. But Esperance's yearly budget, is in the region of 15 to 20 million US dollars. Okay, LAFC's is over 140 million. LAFC are valued at 1.25 billion US dollars. Okay, so this is a team that almost has 10 times the budget of Esperance.
Mm,
And Esperance went out there and they beat LAFC. They were the better team. Yes, they were very reliant on Yusuf Belali, but if you're gonna have Belali in your squad, you have to play the way that gets the best out of him because
mm,
he's the superstar. That's how he plays. So for me, that's why I actually think Esperance are the ones that come away from this tournament with a lot of credit because they played three teams that would have been favorites against them, two of which they had no hope and they lost those comfortably. Yes, they should have been better, especially in that Flamengo game. I was quite disappointed with them. But against LAFC in the one game that really defined their Club World Cup, they beat them. And I think there's huge amount of credit has to go to Kanzara, huge amount of credit has to go to Belali and Ben Said, who made the penalty save against Buanga. So for me, that's why I say this. That's why I say Esperance. I don't think they're the best African team. I don't think they played the best at the Club World Cup. But given the expectations on them, I think they actually had the best tournament.
no, well qualified, well argued. Plagiarism from Maher Rezai.
Exactly.
That's always going to get you past the exam here. Um, Ali, we're obviously winding down the pod, and I want to just get some overall impressions. But before we go there, Wydad was the team we had no hope for, right? And I don't mean that to make Wydad fans unhappy. It was a pretty lackluster domestic campaign. Sadly, Rolani Mokoena didn't get to take this team to the tournament. So we had new coaching. Yeah, do you want to just give us a few words on Wydad, Ali?
Yeah, look, Zayn, again with Esperance, saying we had no expectations does not let them off the hook. We
Sure.
had no expectations because they've been terribly managed over the last 3. I mean, Saeed Nasiri, their coach, is in prison right now and is awaiting trial for, drug trafficking charges. This is a club that's been under like 3 or 4 different, FIFA sanctions in the last few years. Even when they won the CAF Champions League in 2022, they were under a transfer embargo. Like they couldn't sign players. And so for me, like we can't excuse them because they just shouldn't have been at this tournament really in terms of the way they've been run. And I think it's one of the flaws of the Club World Cup is that, it because the qualification is over the 4 years, but it's really over 5 years because you don't include the current season. Because say for instance, Pyramids won the CAF Champions League, but they didn't qualify for this one. It means you get teams that if this was say the 2022 version of Wydad that had just won the CAF Champions League, was coached by Walid Regragui, were defensively solid, I think they can get out of the group, to be honest. Yes, they're still huge underdogs to City and Juve, but I could easily see them getting a draw with Juve. That team was serious. This team wasn't. Now, having said that, Zayn, they were similar to Esperance, where they had no expectations against City and Juve. And actually, I think they did well to lose 2-0 to City. 4-1 to Juve was a decent result. For me, their entire, like Esperance, their entire Club World Cup experience hinged on that last game against Al Ain. And unlike Esperance, Wydad were the favorites against Al Ain. Al Ain we think about Wydad not being managed well over the last few years. Al Ain are kind of in the dumpsters in terms of the way they've been, run the last few years and in terms of their squad. So for me, that was the huge disappointment because Wydad should have won that game. They came out, they were the better side at first. The two South African guys, Lorch and Mailula, were excellent. Mailula scores the goal.
Mm.
They look like they're on top. They look like they're cruising towards a win. And then they kind of collapse in the second half. And for me, that's why Wydad, without a doubt, were the most disappointing team because their expectations were the lowest.
Mm.
And they somehow managed to even go below those expectations because for me, they should have been beating Al Ain. And to be honest, Zayn, I would have been all right with an Al Ain draw because the goal difference, they would have come third. So for me, if you told me before this tournament, Wydad will come third in this group, I would have said, good. They've done well. They've done all right. If they beat Al
Mm.
Ain, that's really good. If they somehow got something better, amazing. But they lost every game. They were the worst team in this group for me. The way they played that last game against Al Ain, and we're left with a huge amount of disappointment for the team.
Ali, as we sort of move away from, or wrap up rather, the FIFA Club World Cup, the teams we've gone through performance, we've analyzed, we've gone through that. But something that, for those of us who are away from the tournament, we've been really proud to see are some of the really colorful, loyal fans who have attended, whether they've traveled or whether they're part of the diaspora in North and Central America. I mean, it has been incredible to see. Of the lot, probably Sundowns had the smallest group of traveling fans, but certainly brought something with that small group. But when it came
100%.
to Al Ali, Wydad, and Esperance, I mean, it looked like there were some really colorful game days. I mean, what were your impressions of it on the ground?
Zayn, Al Ahly outnumbered the host club at the opener. That is crazy. That is crazy. In Miami, in their own backyard, there was more Al Ahly fans than there were Inter Miami fans. For me, like that is insane, and it is amazing to see. And look, for us, it's not entirely a surprise
Sure.
because we know that Al Ahly fans travel. We know that even for previous Club World Cups, you'll get huge numbers, and we also know that in Al Ahly's case they have a huge diaspora in the US, particularly in the Northeast, around where they played their second two games. And I was a little disappointed with the turnout against Palmeiras. They still outnumbered Palmeiras fans. But that game against Porto, that was, that might have as well have been in Cairo. In fact, it's even better because in Cairo they can't even have a full stadium. So for me, that was beautiful to see. Was seeing Al Ahly fans kind of in numbers. And again, Wydad and Esperance, especially Esperance, were terrific. I thought that there would be a lot more Wydad fans, and actually, I think the Esperance fans outnumbered them. And again, even for that last game against Chelsea, they know they're out of the group. Pretty much. I spent a couple hours before the game walking alongside them when they marched from the center of Philadelphia into the stadium at Lincoln Field. It is amazing, like the flares, the passion, the singing, the ultras, like everything was just brilliant to see, and they blew away a lot of the fans. They blew away the viewers. I mean, I was sat next to a guy who regularly covers the Philadelphia Eagles, NFL team. It's their home stadium that we're playing in, and he was telling me, particularly, I think it was at the Flamengo Esperance game. The stadium was half full, maybe a bit over, and he turned to me and said, "Man, I cover the Philadelphia Eagles. They sell out the stadium every game, and I have never seen an atmosphere like this. Half the stadium was full, and it's a better atmosphere than when you have a full stadium of the team that is at that stadium." So I think for me that's the real winners. And like you said, Sundowns less supporters, of course. And I'm sick and tired of this narrative of like this is a terrible tournament because there's no fans. There's issues with this tournament, yes, but Ulsan and Mamelodi Sundowns not having many fans for a game in Florida is
Mm.
not a surprise. It's not a terrible
Mm.
thing, you know. You can speak better to me the kind of financial struggles of people in South Africa right now. No
Yeah,
one's
of
going to
course.
drop $10,000 to come to the US,
No, that's just not
and yet we
feasible.
still saw a few hundred fans there singing, bringing the South African color, representing kind of the Brazilians, the Rainbow Nation, everything that we love to see about South African fandom. So I think even Sundowns fans captured the imagination of football fans from around the world. And I think that's for me the real winners of this tournament are the football fans from these four countries, because they've
Mm.
shown the world, as Morocco and Tunisia did and the World Cup in 2022 in Qatar at this Club World Cup, they've shown the world that these fans are serious, that they're better than virtually any other fans on on the world, not the continent, sorry. And that's something that we should be tremendously proud of.
Absolutely. And Ali, as we sort of bring this pod to a conclusion, I mean, I wanted to get some overall impressions on, the FIFA Club World Cup. A lot of the media that I consume is mainly here in Europe, particularly in the United Kingdom. And a lot of the discussion has been around if an English team wins this tournament, it's not as prestigious. The players clearly would rather be on holiday. They, um, it's almost like this is an inconvenience to be
Mm,
playing at this tournament, and
yeah.
it's not nearly as prestigious as Europe. And people have even gone as far as to say, is like, oh yeah, they talk about the money and the investment in the game, but you're only empowering the elite football clubs, whether it's in Africa, Asia, or Europe. And I'm not saying that doesn't happen, but I feel like they're missing the point around inclusion, around exposure.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's not a perfect tournament. We can get into that at the end of the tournament or whenever we win. But like, what have your impressions been on the ground overall? We're obviously in the knockouts, yet to crown
Yeah.
a winner. Take us through what your thinking is.
I think for me, there's a few things, Zane, is I was listening to, I think it was ESPN, and again, the European journalists who I've seen at the Club World Cup, and they were talking about how, the tournament as it's a tournament no one asked for. There are 32 teams. No one asked for this. This is not what anyone wants. And it made me so annoyed because I'm like, actually, my brother, this is not no one in Europe wants. The rest of the world, we wanted this for a long, long time. I was at the Club World Cup in 2023 in Morocco, and there was 7 teams or whatever, and every Wydad game was sold out. 50,000 Flamengo fans traveled from Rio to Tangier to watch them play Al Hilal. The rest of the world wants this, okay? Europe, it's not about you, okay? And for me, that doesn't negate all the issues with the tournament. And then secondly, I really can't stand this money thing about not the distribution, because I think there's very valid questions there. But for me, the idea is, well, the European teams are only taking this seriously because there's a lot of money. I'm sorry, Zayn. Did Fabrizio Ravanelli sign for Middlesbrough because he loved the culture of the northeast of England? Did Sergio Aguero say, "Oh, I've always dreamt of being a Man City legend"? Did Yaya Toure think the same? He thought, "Oh, Barcelona, this club with history. Let me go to a club with even more history and culture, Man City." No, these players signed to play in England because they paid them the most money. That's
Mm,
the reality. And for me, I don't mind the Club World Cup, FIFA throwing a lot of money at it, because that's how it works. That's how modern football works. So for me, I think it's a non-starter, this idea about, oh, you don't take it seriously because they're just throwing money at it, and that's why the clubs care. Of course they care because of the money. That's how football works, and it has always worked that way. So for me, I find that a non-starter. Now, for me, there are genuine issues around it in terms of the distribution, because I think we look at Wydad, we look at Esperance, we look at Al Ahly, we look at Sundowns. Sundowns have won 8 PSL titles in a row, and now they've just got a cash injection of, well, they got a win and a draw plus 9 million, roughly $12 million. Okay, that is most of their budget for next season sorted. That is more than Kaiser Chiefs and Orlando Pirates' yearly budget. The PSL for me, unless something is done, is dead now. Sundowns will have to do their best not to win it. Same thing for Esperance in Tunisia. Wydad, if they are even ran as a slightly functional club, they should be winning the Batola Pro every year now. Al Ahly, unless Pyramids keep throwing millions and millions at it, they will smash the Egyptian league. For me, that is the big concern. And for me also, that FIFA have done this intentionally. And I think this is where we have to be very aware as Africans. We want to rail against the Europeans and their kind of hegemony of European and neocolonialism and this idea that the world revolves around them. But we also don't want to fall into this trap that FIFA is also laying, that, oh no, we're Africa's allies. Infantino doesn't care about Magesi. He doesn't care about Cape Town City getting relegated to the second division in South Africa. He doesn't care about Al Masry. He wants 4 strong African teams that can compete at the Club World Cup. That's all he wants, because then he can fight against UEFA. And that's what he's getting by injecting this kind of money into the African clubs. So for me, if we want to see a healthy African football landscape, there has to be conversations about the way that money is distributed. And it's the same in Brazil, in South America. The Brazilian clubs have won the past six Copa Libertadores, I think. That's not going to change, because of the amount of money they're getting. So for me, I think we need to couch the criticism of the tournament in the right way and say, yes, this money is going to be destructive because of the way it's distributed. Having said that, and FIFA could have done better. They could have found ways to distribute that money. They could have done that, and they didn't, and they chose not to do that for a reason. But on the other side of things, the fact that there's money being involved is not necessarily the worst thing. And from an African perspective, if you are a Sundowns fan, if you're an Al Ahly fan, you can be forgiven for thinking, I don't care, because for the first time in my club's history, in my continent's history, we are given almost a level playing field to play with the best teams in the world. And whatever you say about FIFA, they have given that chance to African clubs. In the same way that even if the 2026 World Cup is a mess in terms of the way, 48 teams, etc., they have opened the door for African teams in a way that no one else has. So I think for those in Europe who are, constantly critical of FIFA, you have to understand why those outside of Europe might not be, because actually FIFA, for all its issues and for the many issues it's causing in terms of structural football, they have opened the door for other continents to be involved in football in a way that the European clubs have never done and the European hegemony has never done.
Alasdair, I can't say it better than that. This is probably the perfect place to leave the pod. But for those of you listening out there, please find us at our social media accounts, OTW_podcast. Search for us for the On the Whistle podcast on Facebook and YouTube. And of course, you're going to want to follow Alasdair even some more. Because Alasdair, I won't steal your thunder, but it's not long before you head where?
Yeah, Zayn, the fun doesn't stop at this summer, because let me tell you, Club World Cup, world football, none of that. We want African football, and there's no better tournament than the women's AFCON taking place in Morocco. Cannot wait. I will be there for the knockouts. I'm so excited. It was an amazing tournament in 2022. You should all be watching it because it is amazing.
Banyana won.
Exactly, Zayn. Exactly. So even if you love Banyana Banyana, you have to watch to support them. If you're from any of the other countries, you have to watch to stop Banyana Banyana. So for me, there's no reason why you shouldn't be watching it this summer.
Alasdair, we look forward to seeing you there. We also know our women's football editor, Firdaus Munda, will be on the ground. Both of you producing lots of great content. It's been wonderful chopping it up here with you again, Ali. Enjoy what few games you have left for the Club World Cup, and safe travels to Morocco.
All the best, Zayn.